The Seagulls have a lot of question marks coming into 2023. The back end of last year, they didn't even win a game. There's so much turmoil in the club. Des Hasler is gone now. Hopefully, Tommy Trbojevic is back. How do you think the Seagulls can fare to start this season, Scoop? Because that's going to really, play a big part in when we pick up certain players, given they have a bye in round 2 and then a clean run all the way to round 14.
Yeah, it's really tough to predict. They're quite soft in the middle forwards now with guys like Tapau leaving. And I think they're really going to have to rely on Tom Trbojevic being in top form. His partnership with DC is always really good for Manly's top 8 hopes, but it really depends on him carrying the team on its back with the forwards losses, I reckon.
Yeah, and do we think he is going to come back for round 1, or do you think more of a round 3 for him?
I wouldn't be surprised if it was round 3. I think he's in line to start round 1, but it's probably better for the club just to keep him fresh and have those couple of extra weeks, because hamstrings you really don't want to rush, especially with a guy as important and as injury prone with hamstrings as Turbo.
Exactly. I'm actually going to be at this game. My dad's a Manly supporter. Shock. But I'm going to be at this game at Brookie. So I hope that he does play for that sake. But it'd be nice to see Burton and these types of guys roll around, especially if you're looking to pick up a few of these guys in your team. That round 1 at Brookie Oval is going to be lots of fun. But we look at their early season draw. You've got the Dogs round 1, like we said. Bayern round 2. Eels and Rabbitohs round 3 and 4 is going to be pretty tough for them. Knights in round 5 will be okay, but Panthers and Storm 6 and 7. So really the first part of this draw, not very nice at all. From there, you've got Tigers, Titans, Broncos, which is going to be a solid 3-game run. Sharks, Raiders, Knights before their bye. So from round 8 onwards, it's looking pretty nice for them. And I think that would be enough for some of these guys if there are some options that pop up in the side. If a few of these guys get off to slower starts, there's a few sort of mid-range guys there in Talatau Kola, for example. Depending where Ruben Garrick's going to end up. How's Tommy going to start? Where's Schuster going to end up? So there's a lot of question marks. I'm going to go and answer all of those here. Josh Aloiai, do we start up top? You said you've got a slight bit of interest in him. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, with the forwards losses, I would have expected him to pick up maybe a couple of extra minutes, bit of extra work rate. But I think the NRL physio was saying he picked up a pretty decent injury during the World Cup. I can't remember if it was knee or shoulder, but it's actually probably will affect him for the first couple of months and he'll build into his workload. So that probably puts more interest in some of the bench guys in the middle for Manly.
Yeah, well, let's go to a couple of those guys now. Sean Kepi might be one that sparks some interest there at 302k, almost at bottom price there. He did average 21 last year. That's a bit of an interesting one. There's been no real time where he's been a standout kind of guy that's hit anywhere near like a 40 average. So you got him there as a very risky cash cow. Tell us more about him.
Yeah, Kepi's one of those forwards that is kind of a plotter, doesn't have a massive PPM. I think somebody on Manly's bench is going to have to play 40 minutes. And if it's Kepi, that's probably enough for him to make some value, but he won't get much more than 30 with his historical work rate.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a bit of a risky one. If he's not at 250 or 230, then it makes it hard. One you've got here in highlight is Carl Lawton here at 250k. Obviously, any score really, that if he gets some decent minutes, he's going to make some cash. But you've got him down here as a Teamless Tuesday cash cow potential. As you said, there's going to be one or two of these guys that are going to get some minutes on the bench. And with Dylan Walker moving on, do you see him as potentially filling that?
I think he's the most likely candidate to be that utility middle forward, almost like what Wade Graham might do this year at the Sharks. Yep. But from Mail, it doesn't look like he's going to start the year. He might come back round 3, round 4. Right. So it'll be interesting to see if we can find how long that's going to be close to round 1. And if somebody else like, I don't know, maybe a Kepi or a Sipley or even a Bullimore picks up that extra slack for 4 or 5 weeks and maybe get enough value.
Yeah, okay. Well, that sounds great, guys. And if you haven't been checking out Scoop's shorts there on YouTube, just click that button there. You've got all his pods for February, which he's going into great detail on. That Tino one last night was a cracker. I've started to put a couple of mine up, and I've got a bunch already set up, ready to go, where I talk about who I think is going to be in the top 17 on the ladder. So we start with our number 1, which is probably already out by the time you watch this. And also, guys, just check the description down below for the private group. We're giving away a bunch of prizes and getting set for round 1 where there's going to be plenty up for grabs there. So jump in and enjoy that. So we move to guys like Bully Moore. You've got him as a TLT watch. He scares me after last year. Obviously, us starting with him. Did you start with him?
I think I did. He was one of the first guys I got rid of.
Yeah.
But yeah, you kind of forget that he exists when you don't own him. He's that type of player. I think he actually debuted in the middle forwards for the Broncos, but didn't stay there for very long. So if he goes back to some middle minutes at Manly, or even a hybrid middle edge role off the bench, a bit like that Carl Lawton, Dylan Walker role to start the year, he could be interesting, but 382, I'd prefer him if he was about 300 instead.
Yeah, he actually had a pretty good PPM in the middle for Broncos. That's why we're excited for him. And he went to the edge, and as he said, it was pretty non-existent for a lot of it there. DCE is obviously one of our top guns there. Averaged 59 last year. Do you see a little bit of improvement with him, with how bad Manly were at the back end and he didn't have Tommy for a lot of the year?
I think there's definitely uptick with Tommy there and potentially them going a little bit better with Turbo back. It just is the team good enough to keep that high level, because we saw they lost, 7 in a row to finish last year. Yeah. Then they lost a bunch of middles. So DC might not have a lot of room to do things. It'll be interesting to see how much of the ball playing and the kicking he does with Schuster around. So he's a bit of one that's hard to predict. So I've listed him as an avoid purely because he's probably not a top 2 or 3 half. He'll be close, but not quite. And you can pick him up late season.
Yeah, buying round 2 makes it pretty tough to pick him up with a few uncertain thoughts around this team. Ben Condon, you've got as a slight interest there. Obviously, it's basement price at 250, being a middle forward. Tell us more.
Yeah, I think he's pretty likely to get a bench spot for Manly. I don't think he'll get too many minutes, but any more injuries, and he could well, I don't think he'll start, but he could well get into that 30, 40 minutes bracket. And at 250k, he'll be one you'll want to keep an eye on.
Yeah, if he gets that spot, that's the big question mark. And there'll be a forward or two on this bench that gets sort of that 15 minutes and a pretty frustrating. So check him out in trials for sure. Lockie Croker, he comes in at a nice 45 average. It was pretty solid for him, in his first real crack at the hooking position. He improved in the NRL over the year, but given that he's about that 45, even if he improves to like a 50 average, it's probably still too low for the hooker position where there's multiple guys that are scoring way above 50, right?
Yeah, I think he's a bit like a Blake Brayley. He sort of looks cheap and might attract a few guys in looking for a cheaper point of difference option, but I don't think he's really got much upside, so an avoid for me.
Yeah, good idea. And Zach Fulton got a little crack last year. He comes in at basement as well. What are our thoughts on him?
Yeah, Fulton, I feel, is a little bit more depth watch. I've got him listed as an injury watch. I'd say even with the losses, he'll probably be one of the first couple of replacements, but won't be in their starting 17 for round 1.
Okay, yeah. There's a few of those guys, isn't there, that are potentials, and how they're going to go. There's lots of question marks around them. Ruben Garrick there at 646k. He was one of our wing fullback, close to gun statuses, and has played a fair bit of fullback when Tommy's out. And he's an interesting one. I feel like when he plays fullback, he can do really great. If Tommy's there and Manly are firing and he's on the wing, he can also score great. He's going to get a lot more goals and stuff as well. Do we see him just sitting around that 45 and not going into gun status again?
Yeah, I think he's possibly even a couple points overpriced. He scores better at fullback. I think he probably hit about a 50 average for the rest of the year when Tommy was out. So at his price, I probably don't want to get too enthusiastic about him given Manly's outlook this year. But he's possibly moving to the Senders or something this year, isn't he? There was this kerfuffle about him possibly re-signing so that he could move to centre or something like that. So maybe we'll actually see a bit of a reshuffle. I'll be interested to see, because if he does get that centre dual position and then later on in the year goes back to fullback if Turbo's out, well, there you go. There's one of your 2 gun centres like Burton and Aitken last year.
Yeah, I see that as a good option. Yeah, when he re-signed, a clause in his contract said that he would look to play centre. And that was the main reason he re-signed, and they said yes to that. So, yeah, if that happens this year, if he builds into that, who knows? But fullback and centre sounds pretty good from a fantasy perspective anyway. If we can get a 45 average or something with a dual guy, that's going to be cool. You've got Morgan Harper, Talakai's son, you call him, as a slight interest. Tell me a bit more.
Yeah, he's probably less interest now that Garrick's signed to play centre. It'll be Do you reckon Kohler and Garrick centers, either Brad Parker or Harper probably drops out? So, yeah. I mean, there's maybe a tiny bit of upside. He scored better at the back end of the year when Manly went worse, a bit paradoxically, but yeah, I think there's not enough interest in him at the moment.
Well, winger would be then Tuipulotu and then one of those few guys, eh? Like, could Harper play on the wing? Potentially. But either way, if he's winger, we're not interested. So, Cooper Johns comes in. He's on a train and trial, right?
I'm not sure whether he's a train or trial or he's upgraded to the top 30 since I made this list. But yeah, he's definitely behind Schuster and DCE. Kyle Weeks mostly plays fullback, but he can play in the halves as well if he needs to. So I don't really know where he sits in the pecking order. So just an avoid for me until you see him in the team.
Yeah, DC is very... Yeah, he's very much like Damien Cook, just seems to play over 20 games a year, so you never really get to see many of the replacements. So, yeah, leave him out. We spoke about Kepi. Let's talk about Kohler. I find him obviously interesting, given that he's a very talented guy. Got the dual position. He gains a couple of points on his price point, which isn't ideal. But was able to score solidly at centre and also a little bit better at fullback the last few games that he played in the year. Do we see him as having some interest now, later? What do we think?
Yeah, I think Kohler... Yeah, it's sort of hard to know for him. He might improve this year as a player just from as a youngster getting another year, being a little bit fitter and bigger. But yeah, there's much more interest and much more safe upside in other guys. So just to watch. His duel is interesting, so want to keep an eye on.
But I suppose if you compare him to someone like Suali'i, who's going to get the duel as well if he plays centre, and he's like 20k more expensive, it's pretty clear, right? A superstar in a better team. So, yeah, probably go to him first. But Kohler at some point, potentially, if you lose a bit of cash, you could be a 420k cash cow if Manly starts to play really well. Could be interesting for sure. We've skipped Lawton. We go to Ola Kawatu, who is just such a good NRL player. These last few years, he's really shown his class and how just too big, too strong a lot of the time. He's a non-origin keeper, like you said. What are your thoughts right now?
I think he's not one that you'll start with, but I think he's a very good pickup in draft. You can also watch his round one to see how much Manly rely on him, because I think he's probably the only real strike weapon left in their forward pack. Marty Tapau, even though he was a little bit older, still had that X factor, and I think they might have to rely on him a bit more, whether he stays on the field for closer to 80 minutes, because you saw sometimes he'd score 2 tries, Manly'd be winning, and then he'd go off after 60 minutes. If he does seem like he'll be relied on a bit more, he might actually get a bit of an uptick. But yeah, probably one for draft, not for fantasy until Origin time.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And he's just not in that top tier, is he, at the moment? So if he can get to sort of that mid-50s to high 50s, then he really becomes relevant for sure. The next few guys, we've got Brad Parker. Let's avoid him. We got Paseka, who, as you said, there looks like a trap. He's just probably too expensive, isn't he? And the minutes he's going to get aren't going to get him anywhere near like a 50 average. He's had a few years now where he's been sort of somewhat of a focal point in this pack and just hasn't stepped up, has he?
No, not really. I think he had... How many minutes did he have last year? He had pretty solid minutes while he was playing. So I think... he'd need at least 40 minutes, probably more, in order to be valuable. And at his price, you need 45 out of him. And I just don't see it for him. He's not a 45 average player, really.
No, I don't think see much chance. He'll probably just plot around that 500k all year. Okay, we go to Sabi. Is there any interest in Jace?
No, I don't think so. If you really want a fast winger that has no base, go Khan Pereira at the Titans at 230k, not Sab at 372k. I think, he's just going to sit there all year. And I don't even know if he's fit to start the year, so just go past him, yeah. Yeah,
and probably not even any interest across the year, even if he gets a bit cheaper. I think he's coming back from injury at the moment, so he might be close to fitness for round one. Schuster, the interesting one here that unfortunately got up 15 points in his price point there to 33.5. I actually don't see a lot of people picking him, compared to what we were kind of thinking, and a lot of people are like, it doesn't matter. At 479, we'll still pick him up. But there's just so many question marks around him, isn't there?
Yeah, he's sort of the phantom, because I think he's like 25% ownership, but nobody seems to have him that you actually talking with. So it's a mystery where these players are coming from. Maybe they're all new people who are picking on name value. But yeah, the interesting thing about Schuster is he did average 40 a year or two ago when DCE was out. But the thing is, DCE was out, the stats hog. When in 2 games that he did play at half with DCE, it was low 30s. So I think Schuster just doesn't have the base to be really relevant. He's kind of almost like a Kyle Flanagan, Matt Moylan type, where the other half will do most of the playmaking and absolutely dominate the kicking, so they don't have a real good ceiling to get to. And at 33, sort of break even, he needs almost 45 to be a cash cow, and he's just not going to do that this year.
Yeah, we really want to see his running game come out and do really well like he did a couple of years ago. Just didn't play a lot last year, came in underdone. So let's watch him first for the first 5 or 6 rounds. And if he's, doing okay, hasn't gained too much in price, so he's dropped a little bit, he's got sort of 6 or 7 rounds before round 14 for you to pick him up anyway. That dual position's nice, right? But really just not a great option at this point. You got Sipley there. Let's talk a little bit around him. You've got him as a risky cash cow.
Yeah, he's one who I have a bit more interest than someone like Paseka. He's a little bit cheaper and has a really, really good work rate. With so many forwards leaving, and especially the news that Alloy might be worked into the season, he has some upside. He's sort of in that Mark Nichols, Jared Wallace bracket where he's probably got close to 10 points of value if everything goes right, but there's safer guys. So at that awkward price around 400 instead of like a 350k guy, or going up to like a Dan Saifidi in the 500s, it's probably not one you can start with, but he'll be one interesting to watch.
Yeah, it's just an awkward price, isn't it, for someone that hasn't done it before? We've got really Ben Trbojevic there. I don't see him as having any value at all, even at a cheap price. He seems to come in and doesn't score very well, which you've got pretty well the same in there. Minutes-wise, just won't be there, and just PPM, yucky. Jake Trbojevic, past his prime, I would say, in terms of fantasy scoring, he was definitely a low to mid-50s type of guy, consistent each and every week, and he got down to 45 last year, and we just don't see that improving, right?
I think, yeah, there's not much going for Jake Trbojevic. I did hear one narrative by somebody that was pretty interesting from the Late Mail crew. Well, the last time Jake scored really well was when Foran wasn't in the team. Now, that was because Foran could kick a little bit, and so it took pressure off DCE, and Jake didn't actually have to act as a sort of protector, so he didn't get quite as many run meters or tackles. With the Ford's departures, he might be forced to increase his workload a little bit, and with that DCE protector narrative, it's possible he pushes back towards 50, but that's too much narrative for me, not enough solidarity. So just watch Gerbo, don't buy Gerbo.
Yeah, and second to watch, and such a good guy. Love his thumbs up. But he's definitely that link man in the middle, right? He's great footy wise, but not as good fantasy as he used to be. Let's talk Tommy now. This is going to be one of the big guys to finish this off with Kelmer there, and he comes in obviously a little bit priced up, 7 points up, which is still pretty low, to be honest with you, for what he can score. We saw he was that guy that you just captained every single game in 21, averaging double the amount he's priced at now. So the upside's obviously there, massive ceiling, very risky potential gun, doesn't play in round 2. So do you even just look to potentially round 3 or 4 for him?
Yeah, I think you watch him given he's been priced up. An interesting fact is that in full seasons, if you don't take out the injury-affected games, which I think is probably reasonable given his hammy history, I don't think he's scored over 50 in a season in the last 5 years, apart from that 2021. If you take out the injury games, there's plenty of seasons where he's just ticked over 50 or even about 55. So if he can stay fit, if the magic dust that physio over in America that he did for Latrell can fix Tommy, he could be really great, but it's so hard to know. I think you can watch him with that round 2 buy.
Yeah, I agree with that. Even the start of last season, right? He came in and everyone was like, yes, he was super overpriced, so you don't start with him. A few people did and captained him and stuff, but he was fit then and he still had games of mid-30s and 40s. So still even that, everything needs to be on, and then he's an absolute superstar. And he can be similar, apart from that 1 year in 21, similar to Ponga in a way, and just, when he's fit and firing, amazing. When he's not not great. And then Origin, he's just spectacular and scores like a 90 every game in Origin. So
yeah.
Going to be interesting for sure. Kelma Tuolangi is someone I'm interested in, but it's just hard with his round 2 bye. Probably a good thing, though, is we won't start with him, and then we can actually watch him a little bit and see how he's used at Manly, because he was very underutilized, I think, at the Tigers in terms of his running game. He seemed to, every time he got a chance to run the ball, he'd make a tackle break or an offload in that. So what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I don't mind him. He's definitely one that's on my watch list, but don't buy list. He got a lot of HIAs last year and went off with a little niggle that we were all super frustrated because we could see he can score that 45, but he just rarely did. So he's a little bit underpriced what he can be. It's just that whether Manly do play him for 80 minutes, and given that sometimes they take Olukwatu off, maybe they will keep him on for the game. But yeah, I want to watch him first just to check that concussion history won't come back to hurt him. I think if you get through 2 or 3 concussions, the likelihood of suffering future concussions is like 10 times higher or something like that. But yeah, at the moment, he's 500k pretty much on the dot, 35 average. It's hard to project him as a safe cow. He's definitely a risky one.
That's very fair. Where do you see Manly coming this year?
That is, out of all 17 teams, I think they're probably the hardest to predict. If Turbo stays fit and they can actually recover, get a few of these younger forwards coming through and actually showing their stuff, I reckon they can push towards the top 8. I don't think they'll make it, but like probably got a ceiling of 9th or 10th. But if they fall apart, and the back end of last year was dreadful, they could be bottom 4. I've probably got them about 12th, maybe 11th.
Yeah, I see. I think I wrote them down for maybe 12th or 13th as well. So there's just too many good teams, right? You're probably seeing like Raiders at 8th, and they're going to be better. They're a better overall squad than these guys by far. Eels will even be somewhere in that 6-7 range. So yeah, it's just so many good teams. You got Bulldogs getting better. So yeah, they could go nuts if Tommy comes out and does 2021, but if not, it's going to be tough. And we got Tuipulotu there. He, guys, came out and got a lot of tries last year and still only got a 27.5 average. Yes, they struggled at the back end of the year, but he was one of those guys. Just can't see him going much better than a 30, 35 average. And that's if everything goes right. And we're not even sure where he's going to play this year, most likely on that wing. And then KO Weeks, do you know a little bit about him? He's obviously played a couple of games, but any thoughts on him?
I don't know a lot about him, but I know that he's got really big raps. And there's talk that if Turbo doesn't start the season, it might not be Kohler jumping in at fullback. It might even be Weeks. So I think if there is a long-term injury, he could be someone to look at. He is base price, but at the moment, until he's actually there, you just watch.
Awesome. Just have him in the black book, guys. That is the Manly Seagulls. We will be jumping into the Sharks next, which host a lot of interesting players. Thanks, guys.